Liverpudlians. Hello, Scousers. How lovely of you to come to my house. I am so happy to be with you this evening in your charming and
legend!
Rich city, and I love you too, thank you. Now, this is the home of the Beatles, home of Jerry and the Pacemakers, and Echo and the Bunnymen, and among others. Oh, yes, and the home of Everton and Liverpool football clubs. Home of the Merseyside Derby, too. Now, how many Reds are here tonight? How many Blues? How many Blues out there wanted their own team to lose to Manchester City last month? Wow, there's an awful lot of testosterone in this city. My God. I am so pleased that you've taken a moment out of your sort of rivalry to spend some time with me tonight. My dear Alan Jones was so lovely, and thanks for that great introduction. It made me feel very special.
You are.
Now, thank you. So are you, my friends. The last time I was in your fair city, would you believe, was when I was, honestly, about 17 years old. And that is so long ago that the mind boggles. Honestly, it's really changed since I was here the last time. Now, the past 18 months have been an absolute whirlwind for me. The last time, this time last year, I traveled to Australia, and I zigzagged across the country and New Zealand doing a tour of speaking engagements much like this. I co-wrote with my daughter Emma 4 children's books, which were subsequently released in the United States, and they required a lot of promotion. And in the middle of all that, I had ankle replacement surgery. I am now a bionic woman on one leg. Really, it doesn't go off when I go through the airport stuff. It's titanium. Anyway, I then did some engaging, I engaged in appearances in television specials that took me to St. Louis and Los Angeles, New York and Vienna. And if that weren't enough, I worked on the musical adaptation and a production of another one of our children's books called The Great American Mouseicle. Not musical, mouseicle. And that opened at the Goodspeed Theatre in Connecticut in the United States. And I had the pleasure of directing it as well. We're sort of hopeful that it will find its way, with luck, to Broadway and even perhaps London. So would you please keep your fingers crossed for me? Very, very sweet musical. During this past 2 weeks, I was in Los Angeles and New York, and before traveling to London, then Birmingham earlier in the week, and now I'm with you in Liverpool. Now, I mention all of this, I mention it all not to promote these activities, but to give you some understanding as to why, on the journey here, I suddenly found myself reflecting on the enormous role that travel has back again later. And a big trip in those days was to go to the beach. Now, my dad was an advocate of racing sea air. It was always an adventure, I can tell you, because as we all know, England is really a lovely and charming place, but it badly needs a roof, doesn't it? 9 times out of 10, along with the rain, it was freezing in the sea and out. And the smell of chips and candy floss and stale beer completely cancelled out any advantages that sea air might have provided. But around the age of 8, travel for me took on a broader meaning. My mother and my stepfather were in variety. They played in theatres and music halls all over the country. They were also on the radio, and their act was called, well, a sort of good second top of the bill. Now, the great comedians always had the star billing, and Ted and Barbara Andrews, my mum and stepdad, were next in importance. Mum always said it was better to be second top of the bill rather than first, because then you didn't have the responsibility of carrying the entire show if it flopped. My stepfather was a tenor, a very fine one, and he sang everything from grand opera arias to ballads to popular songs. And my mother was a really fine pianist, and she accompanied him at the piano. They had a kind of drawing room type of act. Now, my stepdad decided at the age of 7 or 8 to give me some singing lessons. Partially, I think, to get a little closer to this new stepdaughter who didn't particularly like him very much, but also perhaps to keep me quiet, so to speak. My school had been shut down due to the escalation of World War II, and I suppose I was horribly underfoot, and stepdad wanted to make sure that at least part of my day was occupied. Well, to their surprise, my parents discovered that I had a freak 4-octave singing voice, a soprano voice. I was one of those theatre brats who could sing the hell out of an aria, and really nearby dogs would howl when I went up very, very high and took on those very difficult cadenzas. My parents very smartly found me a wonderful singing teacher, and at our first meeting I sang a coloratura aria for her. She smiled and she chuckled a little, I think and hope with delight, but then she suggested to my mom and stepdad that I be allowed to enjoy life and just be a kid for a few more years. Plenty of time, she said, to begin formal training when I was 13 or 14. But by age 9, my voice had improved so rapidly, they took me back to that good lady, and she agreed to take me on. Well, thank God for Lillian Stiles Allen. She was a brilliant teacher, a dramatic soprano in her own right, and she became a loving, really loving mentor. Gave me a singing technique that I utilize to this day. I'd travel up to Leeds, where she lived, and I would often spend a whole week at a time with her. She remained my teacher until she passed away at the magnificent age of 90 or 91, and I remain forever grateful to that sweet, sweet woman. I made my debut when I was 12 years old, really important debut. There have been in my life 3 really huge stepping stones that pushed me further and further onward, and I think at the age of 12, this was the first one. I was asked to be in a review, a musical review, very, very glamorous, at the then London Hippodrome in Leicester Square. I think it's now a gambling casino, but in those days it was a very pretty theatre. And I was the comedian on the bill, made balloon toys and dogs and horses and clowns and things like that. And he asked the audience if any little girl or boy in the audience would like one when his act was over. And I would run up on stage and say, well, I'd like one, please, out of the audience. And then the lead man in the show, Vic Oliver, was also there, and he said, what do you do? He'd obviously take me last of all. And I said, well, I sing. Well, would you like to sing for us? Yes, what would you like to sing? Well, I'd like to sing the Polonaise from Mignon. And I then launched into this excruciatingly difficult song. And on the opening night of that show, my song, my one appearance, completely stopped the show. The audience came up out of their seats. and they would not stop applauding. And the press that night followed me back home, and a great fuss was made of me, and everybody said I was the young Deanna Durbin of England, and so on and so forth. But it wasn't long after 1 year in that review that I became part of my parents' music hall act. We were now a threesome. It seemed a simple thing to be. So we were now Ted, Barbara, and Julie Andrews. And some of you older folks might even remember seeing us. I don't know if you did. There I was, launched on a rather wobbly professional career and touring all over England. So travel was broadening. During my teens, I guess I journeyed the length and breadth of the British Isles several times, and though I couldn't grasp it, I was getting an education of sorts, although not an academic one, as I was never in one place long enough to attend school. So a tutor was hired for me, and that good lady travelled with me for a while, and thank God for her too, because I'd be even dumber than I am if it hadn't been for her. And I was, however, in spite of very little schooling, I was learning to cope with every kind of theatre situation. In those days, smoking was allowed in the theatres, and people smoked. You could see it coming down the spotlights in great coils. There was a lot of drinking too. Audiences in the balcony, particularly on Saturday nights of the second show, they got pretty rowdy, and a lot of bottles were thrown about from time to time. There were small pit orchestras, landladies, the digs, good and bad. I could write a book on the railway stations and the trains that always had to change a crew and so on. I performed in a lot of pantomimes. I did a number of concerts and radio. But I have to tell you, best of all was standing in the theatre wings, 2 shows a night, watching all those wonderful musical performers strutting their stuff. I mean, I saw so many of the fabulous comedians of the day: Max Wall, Max Bygraves, Harry Seacombe, Norman Wisdom. I don't know if in the North there was a great guy called Norman Evans, and his billing was Good Evans, Norman Evans. And there was a little guy called Albert Modley who was adorable. Lots and lots of fabulous people. Frankie Howard was there, and I just met all of them. My mother told a story about one Monday morning when she was waiting to rehearse with the local orchestra of the town that they were playing in. You know, in those days, when you were in vaudeville, we played a different town every week, and on the Monday morning of that week, all the acts performing on the bill would put their orchestra music down on the stage, left at the center microphone or right, in a long line, and the local maestro would rehearse whoever got their books down first. Now, my mother was waiting for her turn with the conductor and observed a fairly elderly lady, not particularly pretty. She was walking through her act as the band played her music. Well, she just indicated her act. She indicated a spinning turn here and then another turn there, and she sort of went like this. Several giant leaps across the stage were indicated, and 1 or 2 smooth and graceful arabesques with her arms held high above her head. Mum was kind of impressed. She thought the lady was obviously a terrific dancer in spite of her age and her looks, and Mum vowed that come the evening performance, she would stand in the wings and witness this phenomenon. Well, showtime arrived, and the lady swept onto the stage in a hideously coloured, over-fussy evening gown, and she was followed by a troupe of performing dogs who proceeded to execute several turns on their back legs, make giant leaps through hoops, and jump through her arms, etc. So you never know who you're going to meet when you are in vaudeville. I have a story about myself. I was doing a concert somewhere in the south of England, a rather formal concert, and there was nobody, no comedians, no dancers, nothing but sort of violinists and pianists and singers and things like that on the bill. it happened to be a bank holiday weekend, and it was pouring with rain. I said to my mother, "Mum, I'll pack my bag today. You don't have to put my special dress in and things like that. I'll do it." And she said, "Oh, great, darling. It's time you grew up and did that kind of thing." So we got to the venue. We sloshed through the mud, and I was wearing sort of trousers and very heavy brogues, and my socks got splattered with mud. It was a mess. Got inside, took out my incredibly short little frilly party dress, couldn't find my ballet shoes, couldn't find them anywhere. I had forgotten to pack them. Now, I couldn't wear my frilly little ballet dress with muddy socks and huge brogues, almost like boots. I had remembered, however, to pack what we used to call in those days wet white. It's the thing that you clean your sneakers with and your tennis shoes, makes them whiter. And Mum said, "Well, God, what are we going to do?" There weren't any shops open. There wasn't a soul on the bill who could lend me a pair of light-looking sweet shoes for my act. So she said, "I'm going to have to paint a shoe on your sock." Now my sock, I'm ashamed to say, it had a hole in the toe and in the heel. She painted that too, painted out the mud spots. Unfortunately, when I tripped lightly onto the stage, I left a little trail of white footprints wherever I went because it hadn't dried. Now the audience, there was no footlights, nothing, and I could see that audience going, "Is she wearing shoes or isn't she?" And I was mortified. I put one foot behind the other in an effort to only show one foot maybe. I never got through my act so fast, and I barely took a bow, and I never forgot my shoes again. But at the age of 18, I was, by now, working without my parents, and I was in a Christmas show at the London Palladium, playing the role of Cinderella in London's West End, when the second of those three beautiful building blocks in my career, the second of those breaks in my life, happened. I was asked if I would like to go to New York to star in a musical called The Boyfriend. Now, The Boyfriend was running very well in London, and the producers of The Boyfriend didn't want to take their company over to America because it was doing so well, they didn't want to touch it. So the American producers said, "Well, we'll just completely cast anew." Now, therefore, they actually found me. So while thrilled at the idea of traveling all the way to America and the idea of the show, the thought of it was really too much for me. I was going to have to be stuck in a 2-year contract. That's what everybody had. And I thought, oh God, without seeing my family for that length of time, well, it was simply too frightening a concept for me. The proposed salary was really minimal, and neither I nor any member of my family could afford the cost of a trip for them to come and join me. I was also very, what's the word you use when you're very frightened to leave home? I left home a lot when I was touring, but that separation anxiety built up in me, and I just didn't want to be that far away. So I stalled for quite a while and said, I don't know. I decided to talk to my sweet dad about it. And he pointed out that the show could only run maybe 3 weeks or at the most 3 months, forget about the 2 years, and the experience would open up my head and be invaluable. And I hadn't thought of it that way. And I thought, well, I would love to see New York. And he kept saying, "Go on, darling, I think it's time." I reluctantly agreed that I would go, providing, I've never up to that point done that, providing, I said, that my contract was for 1 year only, not 2. To my absolute surprise, the producers consented, and now my travel horizons expanded beyond my wildest imagination. That year just flew by.